Hello, I am here with Ornella Matta-Figueroa, and I'll let you introduce
Hi,
yourself.
Isha.
Hi.
Hi. My name is Ornella. I live in Vermont. I've been doing some form of healing work now for the last 5 years consistently. I've had, an immense privilege, I will say, to be able to focus on my healing work for the last 5 years. And yeah, I don't know what else you want to know about me. I'm working on a Ph.D. in mind body medicine. I have a master's degree in public administration, and I run a local nonprofit as a co-director because we have a shared leadership model where I support the running of of a nonprofit. Always working on that hierarchical language as well. So, um, yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to share a little bit about how we met because it's a demonstration of like Puerto Rican culture in action and also like Rompereglas.
Definitivamente.
Yeah, we met through a mutual friend, right? We
Mm-hmm.
posted under this mutual friend's post, right? We caught,
Mm-hmm.
and you reached out to me in a private message.
Well, yes, because I'm always looking at synchrony, and I respond very much in that language. Like I listen to synchrony and respond to synchrony. And I had been searching for collaboration. It's really lonely work when you're in the US as being a little only. Me necessarily in Vermont, for example, feeling very alone. I don't see any people of color where I am. And also meeting other Puerto Rican women who are doing the intentional work of decolonization. So when I saw you in my mind, I was so excited and also a little afraid, right? How is this going to go? But in my mind, I remember telling myself, you're going to respond. And if she responds, then it'll be fine, right?
Yeah.
It'll be something I'm supposed to explore more and get to know this person. And then we talked, and I just honestly, my biggest memory is you showing up at my house this summer.
Well, let me back up because we connected just a month before the pandemic, right? It was like
That's
end
right.
of February, beginning of March, and then the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
hit, and we had made plans to do this witch camp together that eventually got canceled. And then you said, "Why don't we do witch camp at my house in Vermont?" And I was like, "Okay." And without even knowing you, having just spent a couple of back and forth messages on WhatsApp, I showed
Oh,
up.
we did have a couple phone conversations.
We did. We did.
So we may have had a couple of phone conversations before too. Yeah.
Just feeling each other out and sharing our stories, like our childhood
Mm-hmm.
stories, and sort of like what part of the island we both come from, and were we there at the same time, and did we like, because you know we might have known each other and not known it, um,
Yeah.
right? But then I showed up with a tent at your house with my children, and I remember the
Yep.
first moments showing up. That was the first time I thought, oh shit, what the fuck am I doing? I'm like, I'm at someone's house and I'm supposed to stay for the whole week, right?
Yep.
And what happened was that it was really seamless.
For me, it was the ways the kids related to one another that felt so impressive, right? To me, I was amazed by the ways that it was like, whoop, they're all kind of raised the same.
Right,
And
right.
it just worked. They just there was a way in which there was this culture that we had given them that then translated, and when they related to one another, it was really beautiful. It was really nice.
I think that's what was really special about that week, was really seeing the way that you parented, and for me feeling really validated in that style of parenting, because I'm also like lots of freedom and lots of boundaries, and getting like really carving out space for myself. And you and I had like very similar tones of voices, and that was very affirming to me.
It was for me too, especially because we get so much shit in our culture for doing it this way. I'm gonna say that. We get so much shit. At least I have from my family of origin in I think everybody has a way of imitating the ways I used to talk to my 3 or 4 year olds just to tease me still to this day. They still like joke and make fun about, are you sure you would like that? Why don't we take a moment and breathe right now? And, you know, um, so it was really affirming and nice to be able to share that, to share motherhood with someone who understands or is also thinking about it in that in gentle and direct and self-aware ways,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, that prioritizes the self while also prioritizing the children, while also being kind to them and treating them like whole adults, like whole people rather than less than.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Right. And I mean, the way we're
yeah.
talking about it makes it sound like it's so like soft and gentle, but at times it's just like it's a hard no. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like I said, da 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 da. And it does have a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of that Puerto Rican flavor of, don't sass me now, or whatever it is, but it is gentle and firm at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Without being, like I tell my mother, um, without being emotionally damaging or emotionally or manipulative, which is also a part of Puerto Rican culture in a sense, right? In the ways that women relate to children. You know, what would you do without me?
Right, exactly, exactly. One day I'm gonna die, and
One day I'm gonna die. All you have is one another.
Puerto Rican mother, right? So I didn't get that piece. I got something
That's right.
that has its own, like it's had needed to unpack that also, and still do
Mm-hmm.
unpack it. But I want you to speak a little bit about your why, right? Like why you are so into decolonizing, and talking about the process of motherhood and how like that is part of your healing journey.
Thank you for asking. Why? 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 Let me think. Honestly, what pushed me towards decolonization was searching for a way to live.
Mhm.
In my most in my most honest and vulnerable, I will tell you that conforming made me want to die. For lack of, it's just that simple. It really pushed me into spaces of unhealth and suicidal ideation. I And in searching for myself in that, what I realized was that this that's what decolonization, which I'm now using decivilizing over decolonization these days, because of the indigenous ties and ties to land. I'm trying to find different language for myself to describe the work that I've been doing. And motherhood is tied to it because it was when I gave birth, or I think even with the birth of Mackenzie, who my partner carried, it was in that process of me caring for another being that I really became aware of the things that were not okay in my body and in myself, to be able to be a person that could raise another human being well.
Mhm. Mhm. I love,
So,
sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
no, go ahead.
No, I just love how you said, like, conforming made me want to die. And
Mm-hmm.
when you and I were getting to know each other, part of what really like struck me and just had me so fascinated with you is like how like we grew up on the same island, but our childhoods were so different. Like I want you to share a little bit about what it looked like to conform in your family, because I think that is very stark for me.
Yeah. Ooh, where do we begin with this, right? I I come from a family who was very focused on my education. I was provided very good opportunities for education. I come from a family who was involved in politics as well. So there was this, my grandfather had these big hopes and wishes and dreams that this was the life that I was going to pursue. And he contributed to my education in ways that would in the future make that possible. I also had an aunt who was a model. So she worked for Refine and she would come to my house to give me private lessons. And and I was expected to walk with a book on my head up and down the stairs. And if I made the mistake of like running up the stairs, there was this whole, my grandmother would come at the bottom of the stairs and I was made to come back, walk down them one more time and then walk back up correctly. Um, a lot of table manner. It was like a recording, sit up straight, bring your food to your mouth, not your mouth to your food. Are you using, so there was a lot of this kind of civility training that was, and I valued that for a very long time. I worked very hard to follow all of the rules, to sit correctly, to open and close doors correctly, to have the demeanor of someone raised by my family in whatever ways they wanted me to be. And then, moving to the United States gave me a whole lot of freedom of expression, to my family's grief, I imagine, because being so separated from them meant that I had a whole lot of freedom. And while I'm still fitting into the boxes, then, I came out as a lesbian. I decided to have children with a woman who I then divorced and then raised children with her still to this day. And I have all these weird and different ways of having family, but internally I still had this pressure of, I remember realizing that I would talk about my family and the ways in which I would explain things, I was asking people to be like, here, look, is just as good as a straight one. You see how well we're doing this? We are just as good as a straight family. Can I get your validation now? And it was this energy that I really carried into everything that I was doing because I was searching for that validation from the outside, from my family, still to this day. Like, oh my God, the last 2 days have been daddy issue central for me. Like this is like, we're always working through pieces that come up, even pieces you think are done. And then all of a sudden they're like, hello, we're here again for reevaluation. Like there's, what's the word? It's the process. Yeah. It's a process. Yes. I feel like I went on and on in there.
Oh, no, this is great because I want to know a little bit about like what made you decide, like what was, I know that's a series of moments, but oftentimes we have like this wake up call, this like, that's it, I'm done, or that moment you make a decision to be a rompereglas, right? Or to break some of the internalized you grew up with, where you're just like, yeah, done, or I'm going to take this leap.
Yeah, I don't know if there was a specific moment for me. I think I've always been a bit of a rompereglas, even in my rule following. It was just more allowed. in Puerto Rico than it was here. So culturally, I think that Latino culture allows for women to be more of a rompereglas regardless.
Mm-hmm.
And American culture doesn't allow that. So in that self-perception, I think that, I don't know, I think that it's been a progression, right, of layers of, it wasn't one moment, it was like a whole bunch of little moments in which I sat with my body and realized that what I was doing was at such dissonance with my soul.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that parenting in ways that continued to control my children, for example, was at dissonance with the ways in which I felt in my heart would make connection.
Mm-hmm.
That focusing and having unconditional positive regard, for example, which I know has an aim, which was what I was doing, but it was what came out, right? It was what felt most synchronous with what was happening. And just choosing to follow that synchrony and follow that heart instead of following the old toxic models over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Instead of continuing to spank, continuing to use manipulative language, continuing to bribe, continuing to I don't know, focus on the external rather than the internal.
Right. Right.
Encourage cultural patterns or cultural norms that I didn't feel were in sync with my heart, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a whole bunch of little choices for me. It wasn't this one big, from now on, I am going to do it this way, right?
Yeah, we're going to come back to this, to the trauma healing through parenthood or motherhood. But I also want to go back to what you said about Puerto Rican culture gives a lot more freedom to break the rules versus, maybe white American culture. And I want you to elaborate a little bit on that because I'm really curious how you see it. I agree with you, and I want to hear your take on it.
Well, I think it's all oppressive paradigms. As somebody who's a minority in a culture, we're always over policed. So there is, like, we don't get away with, nearly as much as people who are, white in America. I didn't know that because I moved here when I was 16. So my experience of schooling had been primarily in Puerto Rico. So when I moved here, it was really shocking to me, all these boxes that Americans put their teenagers in. And all of the ways in which I could only be one or the other, all of the ways in which your behavior then limits access in the future, right? Like in schools, in the ways in which teachers are racist, and all of these kinds of things that I just did not have any like real experience with until moving to United States.
Yeah.
Not that there isn't racism and colorism in Puerto Rico, but it's a totally different experience of racism and colorism in Puerto Rico.
And I feel like what you named is like a sense of fluidity, right? And because Puerto Rico is not such a well structured and organized place, like there is a lot of societal rule bending, right? It's just like, if you get a ticket from the police, you may be able to talk yourself out if you give them a good story, or you can run the red light at a certain night. I mean, these are the things that I grew up with. Like the rules can, so I had that like as part of my understanding of the world, right? And also like we were talking about like high school culture, like there wasn't the nerds, like there were nerdy kids, but there were also cool kids, and they were also sporty, and they were also, right? So there's fluidity in terms of, yeah. Okay.
Yes. And something about rules in Puerto Rico is that when you're a colony, there's a lot of rules that don't make sense.
Right.
So for a long time, and this is something that is actually in synchrony with a lot of the things that I've been talking about and thinking about just recently. So I'd like to name it just for whomever listens. Um, but that's something that I really see too, is that in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of laws and rules that don't make any sense, that continue to oppress society because they're all colonial rules. So I think that there was a freedom of applying them, and like even in the self-perception of the people who are enforcing the rules in Puerto Rico, there was a lot of that kind of dancing between what is necessary, what is, there's an inner dissonance between the rules that are enforced and the rules that exist and the rules, because they know it's bullshit, right? Even the people enforcing them are 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 looking at them like,
Okay.
why are we doing this? Yeah. So I just wanted to note that little bit too, so we can.
That's a great point. I think that we do grow
Yeah.
up with understanding of like, it's all made up anyway.
Somebody else is controlling us. Somebody else is deciding it. So there's also this inner fight, that happens at every point in which we're trying to sort our like our natural selves out from the colonizer control. If there is any of that awareness, which for me it was present because my mother was somebody who taught me that. Right? My mother taught me Puerto Rican history in a way that told me the Native Americans were murdered by the Spaniards, that the Taínos were killed by the Spaniards. I didn't have this Mr. Happiness perspective on Puerto Rican history, like the majority of my peers had, because my mother was someone who really challenged those notions while also making me walking downstairs correctly. So let's just, you know what I mean? Let's just have those two pieces.
Right? Yeah. And so let's go to that. That's a beautiful segue. So let's go to right, like how you are, right? How you were and still are in the process of that healing journey through motherhood, getting synchronous, getting aligned, getting congruent.
It's interesting because I've been thinking about that need for congruency and trying to challenge that with flow, with presence, right? So it's really hard for us to put structures over emergence. So I've been trying to work in presence with the children and trying to give them what they need in whatever moment without necessarily putting a structure over it and deciding ahead of time what that's going to be, deciding ahead of time how it is that I'm going to interact with them, which is really in conflict with the notion of children needing consistency. The consistency I offer my children is unconditional positive regard. I could keep everything else outside of consistency, but if there's an argument in my household, I go to talk to my kids first. I always focus on the relationship over the punishment or over the argument. I always focus on connection with them no matter what is happening around us. No matter what's going on, no matter what the rules are, what rules were broken, what rules I don't ever have a clear sense of that consistency with them now because of trying to work in presence and flow. And I just focus on that unconditional positive regard and that personal connection between them and I at all points.
Right.
And also speaking from a vulnerability. So also connecting with them as a human being and as a person who's trying to solve whatever is in front of us. And we're working on this together. So normal teenage things, the room, a messy room.
Yeah.
Right? There is a messy room. I will ignore it for the most part. until one day I will go in there and say something like, Christmas is coming. Where are we going to put anything you get? There is no place to put anything in this room.
Something like, we have some stuff to throw away, which is slightly.
Yeah, or like I think that, yeah, like I don't think we can give you any other presents because there is no place to put them. And imagine that room got cleaned pretty quickly, right? But I didn't make it. I don't make things a huge fight. I ask for their timing. I try not to be in controlling spaces or to treat them like they are not people in our home who also have thoughts and ideas about what they want to do with themselves in their day.
Yeah.
So it's a so going back, I don't necessarily have a structure. I try to work in flow and try to also challenge that inside of myself and the need for the structure and the need of the control, and trying to learn how to live in emergence, which I think is so necessary for our society right now overall. And it's something that we need, in my opinion, right? Not need as in like righteous need and everybody needs to do it my way. But I think I like the fact that I'm practicing in my house on what does it look like when we live in emergence? How is it that we create around what's needed right now and give right now what it needs, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm.
So we can all feel whole, we can all feel safe, we can all feel loved and resourced and supported and held and respected and whatever it is that we may need in whatever moment. And outside of fear, outside of shame.
Yeah. And I mean, that all sounds amazing. And I think that I pretty much do that too. And I know that there's a lot of things that I've really needed to let go of. And there's been some. So share a little bit of the messiness of the process, because I know that.
Oh my gosh.
You didn't just, de un día para otro.
Yeah, no. And it's still messy, right? I experience lots of having to show gentleness for myself because motherhood self-judgment is so hard. Mm-hmm. It's the worst of all of the things, I will say. So I've spent a lot of time.
Especially if you care about the job that you're doing. Right? If you really care about the job, then you're like, I want to do it right, which is part of the shit that our brain tells us.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way of presence, the way of flow, but sometimes we have an idea of what that looks like.
So many things. Oh, I used to spank my kids, not very often, but that's one of the things that has really, really changed since they were born to now. We have a no papa rule now, which would have been different even 3 years ago. It could have happened. Not that it happened very often, but Savannah unbuckled herself from her car seat in the middle of the throughway as a 3-year-old. And I had told her 50 times not to do that. And I'm pulling to the side of the throughway with a 3-year-old running around the minivan at that point. And the fear, the anxiety, I remember like whacking her little legs a couple of times. And then this is what stopped it. And this is one full stop, right? This is one thing that really changed the way I parented, was that a couple of weeks later, I was upset about something and I walked towards her and I watched her recoil from me.
Yes.
And still to this day, that is one of the most impactful moments in my life, was the witness of my baby not trusting me enough to come towards her. And I wasn't going to spank her at that point in time. It wasn't something that happened very often at all. But just that moment of watching her recoil was enough for me to just, I apologized right there to her. I told her, I am sorry. I'm sorry. That's what I did. I should have never done this. And from now on, we're going to figure out how to do this without spanking.
Mm-hmm.
And still to this day, there are days in which I'm so overwhelmed that I will, you guys are leaving me no other option. Do I need to go back to Papa house? Right. And they don't ever push me there. They don't want that either. Right. So they really try to be collaborative and loving and not, they don't press me into those spaces. There's been many mistakes that I've made over the years with like even potty training, even sleep training. Oh my gosh, when I look back, there's so many things that I just didn't know. And we just apologize and we just keep it moving, right? I'm very honest with them when I make mistakes, and they're very gracious and very kind to me, and they forgive me, and we do it better next time.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important to highlight is that for people listening, that when you grow up in a family that is either really rigid or where there's abuse or where there's some form of trauma, right, in whatever direction it goes in, that when we parent, we try to do it differently, and we don't know what we're doing. We're trying to do this from a place of like congruence, like really trying to find that place in you where it's like, no, this feels right. You're following your intuition. And that there's a lot of unknown in that space of like, right, we try this and that didn't work out so well, and we try that, and we finally find our way, but it's messy. It's really messy.
My mother used to say that the children are not our children, right? They belong to the world. She used to say this when she tried to remind herself, even if in action she did it differently. But she always told me that, like, children belong to the world. And that's something that I think as parents we should remember, is that the children come with their own things.
Yes.
The children are people. They come with their own things. They come with their own learnings. They come with their own knowledge. They come with their own energy. And the more we understand who they are and we get to know them as individuals in this world and connect in a way that supports their self-expression over stifling it, it's something that, I think that parent children and the community relationships could be so different just from acknowledging that sense of self in the child that at times is so controlled, ignored, manipulated. And I think that that's where a lot of teenage oppositional behavior comes from.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, it's ultimately why you're doing it the way you're doing it, is because you want to raise free people. You want to have that sense of agency over their own lives, over their own choices, right? It's like, yeah, the goal is so much bigger than just like the thing that's happening right here in the house. It's like extrapolates into the
Yes, absolutely. And I think that when we look at children and when we look at the fact that we are creating culture, right? We're so used to everybody telling us how to do things that it's really hard for us to trust our own creation. Many of us struggle with creativity. Many of us struggle with self-expression in all of those ways and with that authenticity because we're so afraid of who we are. And we mean we're so afraid of how who we are is going to be received out there.
Yeah.
And with our children, that's pretty much what we're doing. That's in our families. We're creating whatever we want. It doesn't have to look like anything else. And it doesn't have to look like the ways our parents did it. And it doesn't have to look like what anyone else does it or what it looks like on TV or anything like that. And I think that's hard for people to walk without rules, to walk trusting their own gut in what's happening, to understand that, if all children are different, there's never one way of doing anything. There's not one way of parenting. And I believe that wholeheartedly. I believe that every child needs to be parented differently depending on who they are
Yeah.
and what their needs are.
Yeah, and you make an excellent point around like orienting inward to that sense of trust. A lot of us
Orienting inward. Yep. Good language for that. Orienting inward. That's exactly it. Yep. And that's hard. That's very, it's a practice.
Yeah.
It's definitely a practice, especially for colonized beings. But we're all in one way or another, no matter the color of our skin, or our culture in some way. Maybe in different parts of the world it would be different, but let's stick to America. In the United States of America, I imagine that we're all struggling with that control from that external
Absolutely. I agree.
information.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And so you talk a lot about regulation.
Mm-hmm.
What looks like for you, because I know
Self-regulation.
regulation.
Oh, I'm very fortunate to have been able at this point to set up a very different life, right? So I will start with any type of, like, I understand and acknowledge my privilege and the fact that I parent full time, 2 weeks out of the month. The other 2 weeks, my ex parents full time. Um, and that gives me and affords me a lot of privilege. The kids and I are constantly in touch over email, over video, but it does give me and afford me a whole lot of freedom that I know is not something that most mothers have in the world. And I just really want to acknowledge that because it's true. I also worked really hard to create that, right? So I will also say in working with my co-parenting relationship, in creating the space for me to be able to have that, I believe that it could be possible for a lot more people to live in different ways if they try and if they go through the work of creating that space for themselves as well. I think I spent a lot of time in self-regulation. I every day looks different for me.
Mhm.
I've been working in, so I cry when I feel like crying. The kids are used to it. So if I feel like crying, I cry and they're like, "Are you okay? Do you need any support from me?" type of interaction. And if I say no, they know that we is better out than in. You know, crying is better out than in. And if it stays in, it festers. And that's language that we will use often in expressing, we're crying to cry because it feels like crying and we're going to purge it. What else? I have counseling almost every week. I have good collaborative friendships that I touch base with often to support my witness, to support the work that I do in the world. Nothing I do happens in a vacuum. None of the work that I give other people happens in a vacuum. None of the work that I create or support in community, everything is supported by a whole bunch of counsel and peers that are also doing this work and who are there to offer their witness and their checks at times as well, right? It's good to let ourselves be known enough that people around us can say, "Hey, hey, hey, I'm seeing a piece of your shadow work right there." When we can't do that for ourselves in whatever moment, right? What else?
It really speaks to it really speaks to the importance of being supported.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who are healers or coaches like you, right, who hold space, bridge builders, connectors, weavers, we need to be supported. We're doing big,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even when it is motherhood, right? Where it's not, where it feels very localized and very immediately in front of you and doesn't feel like it's connected out there, which it absolutely is. We need to be supported here as well.
Oh, absolutely. I honestly think that it's one of the social, like the structural social things that I would like, I wish we could change right away, is to give mothers lots of circles of support. I think that mothers are too alone. I think that I think that in our communities too of healers and magic makers, and I'm even choking a little on this, right? Like, this is how, what a big deal this is for me, so please excuse me. As I clear my throat. In our communities, in our communities, we weren't allowed to raise children before. So when we look at magic makers in literature, when we look at women that used to hold these types of healing responsibilities in community, our children were either taken away, we were supposed to be giving them away when they were 11. If we look at all of the examples of priestesshood, for lack of a better word, right? I still don't like the hierarchical. But I'm just using the words that exist right now without wanting those types of things associated to any of me or any of us. Um, but when we had those responsibilities and when we worked in trance, when we worked in spaces of healing, we weren't allowed to keep our children. We gave them up. Other people raised our children.
Oh,
So there is a lot of these kind of internal insecurities that are coming up too, because it is so hard to both do the work of healing, to do the work of healing in the world, and also to do the work with our families. It is so hard, and I I see that, and I wish I could change it. I wish that we could offer women more motherhood circles, more spaces for women to be able to share child rearing responsibilities. How beautiful was it when you were here that week? And there was space, you could go for your walk, the kids were fine. There are spaces of being able to like have this shared support. Like, some days you made dinner, other days somebody else made dinner. We all ate. The
yeah.
kids were directed, and it's really these types of community spaces for mothers would be so healing and so supporting to the overall health of our communities. And I think that that's definitely like a good place to start. If people are like, what should we work on? Offer mothers a lot of circles and a lot of support. Can we start there? Because this whole thing, like the expectations, especially right now, the expectations for mothers is something that's completely unrealistic. And it's just too hard for women to be able to offer healing to others, work on their own healing, and also parent. It's just.
Oh my God, it's so good to hear you say that. And thank you for weaving that back into the conversation. Because this touches on a piece that we talked about when I was up in Vermont in August, was right that brujas, witches, had not had a chance. And that now
Say that again.
that
Brujas, witches, what?
brujas and witches had not had a chance to raise children, and now we're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing
Mm-hmm.
work in our families, and even just like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, healing generational stuff is very powerful. Really, really
And
powerful.
transmitting the culture and transmitting the magic and teaching our daughters or our sons or our children, right? Not that we have to gender them, but teaching our little beings how to interact in the world in ways that are whole and healthy, and that see in whatever capacities they have, right? Because not everybody's meant to do the same work. Not everybody's supposed to be a witch or a healer. Not that and everybody has their own work in the world, whatever that may be. But there's this beautiful awareness, right? I'll never forget the day that Mackenzie went outside and she goes, "It's gonna rain."
Yeah.
And to me, that was such a powerful moment in my little, I was like, she's connected to nature enough to know I can smell rain. And that's all we want, right? And how that to me is witchcraft.
Yes.
That to me is magic.
Yes.
To be able to feel the water and say, hey, I think that a storm is coming because this water is rushing, in the river, or to be able to feel the warming of the earth around February, right? You can stand outside and you can actually feel the earth warming up. And then what they do with all of that is theirs.
Yeah.
Because this is not indoctrination, this is not control, this is just them having the modeling, the witness of the ways that we live too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? Like, whereas before they would be raised by someone else and they wouldn't have our modeling and the ability to witness us in the ways that they can now.
Mm. Ay, mija, so beautiful, so beautiful. It's almost like get out of the way parenting, right? It's like it's presence and getting out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Presence and getting out of the way. And I think lots of, just love.
Yeah.
Just love for who they are, love for ourselves,
Right.
right? Because it's the more that we're able to love ourselves and accept ourselves in our wholeness, the more we are able to offer it to our children. So I'm so reluctant to create labels for things right now because I'm really challenging my need for labels in the world. But yes, let's call it hashtag get out of the way parenting. But I'm really trying not to need labels, but it's hard not to.
That's great. That's awesome. Is there like if you were the host, what's a question that you would ask yourself as we today?
If I were the host, what is a question I would ask myself? That one's hard. I don't know. I think you've asked very good questions.
Is there anything that you think it's really important for listeners to
Just gentleness with themselves. Just that space of just holding the truth about, like, being honest with ourselves, holding the truth about what we see and who we are, and just having that be okay.
Yeah.
Just loving ourselves wherever it is that we're at in whatever moment. And just going from there, right? And whatever it is that we are in that moment, just, we're all, if we're here listening to this podcast, I bet we're all doing the work of self-reflection, of growing, of healing, right? So I see so much pain and harshness lately in the ways that people treat themselves.
Yes.
That and in the ways in which people don't, because now this work is trendy. So there's a lot of energy around this self-development work, which I so admire and appreciate. But there's also all of these, I'm going to call it culture of dominance behaviors, like sense of urgency, that are also wrapped into these self-help structures and all, in our self-assessment of them, right? and how well we're doing, how fast we're seeing results, how, this is this, or how it never ends. Like, people really want the self-reflective work to, at some point, it's hard work. It's hard work to be in a place because of our parenting structures and the ways of that parenting was used in the past, and the ways in which we treat ourselves based on the ways we were parented. There's all of this real harshness that's involved in the ways that people self-perceive their growth.
Yes.
So as we're entering another cycle, as we're entering another year and all of these things, I encourage people to just, if they're already doing their checks, I encourage folks to just continue to practice gentleness, continue to self-observe, and to take it easy, to just, it's okay. It's going to take time. It's okay that it takes time. It's going to take practice. It's okay that it takes practice. We're going to screw up. Things are going to come up again, and it's okay that they are. What I watch sometimes, how I notice how much time to like reward myself. Oh, it took you less time to be aware of it this time. So I do that a lot. It's like, oh, you totally did that again, but you noticed this time. You noticed a day sooner than you did last time. Oh, you're in codependence again. Look at you being all codependent again. Let's do that. Let's check that. What happened here? So just using the kindest, most unconditional, positive regard voice for our own selves. Yeah.
Compassion. Tiene tantos nombres. Has so many names.
Self-compassion. Yeah.
Like, right, if we don't use the gentleness, then we're speaking to ourselves in a harsh voice, and it's like we're then we're in congruence, right? We're not in congruence. Yeah. Ornella, thank you so much for, I want to say, for being here, for because it feels like I'm hanging out with you, and it feels so good.
I know, I've missed you. So nice to hang.
And where can listeners connect with you online?
Oh, wow, that's right. I have a Twitter that I use most often, which is at Ornella. No, it's at Decivilizing. Right now on Twitter, my name is on it though, so you'll be able to find me easy, just Ornella Matta-Figueroa. I am taking 5 outside of my community clients this season. So that's something that I've been kind of called to extend the reach of outside of just the people that are right around me. So I'm coaching, I'm accepting 5 new people this season for winter. And then, I'll do 5 in the summertime. I don't have a lot of capacity right now. So I'm wanting to share connection and share supports. But I can't do a whole lot of clients at the moment. And email, they can connect to you and you can connect them to me.
I'll include all of that in the show notes. So I'll include your email.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes. Qué bueno. Thank you so much.